Hi, Carl here for ProAV TV, and today we're very lucky to get some hands-on time with a pre-production unit of the Panasonic GH5s. So we've come down to the beautiful Hurst farm down in Kent, which has been supplied to us by our friends at JJ Media. So if you guys need any locations whatsoever, they've got a huge database, like over 2,500 locations of all different kinds. So make sure to check them out in the description below. But today we're here with our beautiful friend Serene to get some lovely shots with the GH5s. So this is the Panasonic GH5s. This is essentially the same camera as the GH5 before it, but with an entirely new sensor inside. There's a little bit of a surprise, to be honest. I mean, the GH5 and particularly cameras like the EVA are not exactly old cameras now from Panasonic. So I was surprised to see this now, but essentially it takes what the GH5 was great at and improves on what it was maybe not so good at. The ergonomics, the specs, things like that remain very similar in this camera, but with a brand new 10.2 megapixel sensor, which Panasonic is saying gives you 14 stops of dynamic range and is perhaps the best low light sensor that's micro four thirds that we've seen yet. And certainly from some initial tests that I've been doing, that does seem to be the case. It really is quite impressive what this can do in low light when you consider the size of the sensor. We've seen a lot of camera releases recently that have been about refining the ergonomics of a camera. So it's essentially the same camera, but the new version makes it easier to use. This is the exact opposite. This is exactly the same ergonomic camera as the GH5. I mean, sure, you've got a little red touches on the top, a red record button, things like that. But essentially, all the buttons are the same. It is the same camera physically as the GH5. But with that new sensor inside, we really are getting a huge step up in terms of image quality. Right, so let's talk about what's new. So the main thing that's new is obviously the sensor inside. So it's a 10.2 megapixel sensor, 14 stops of dynamic range, and a dual native ISO, which is really fantastic to see in a small body like this. The ISOs that are native, in normal picture profiles, it is 400 and 2500. And then in Vlog or hybrid log camera, it's 800 or 5000. So it's sort of near the Vericam levels of that high ISO performance in terms of the dual native ISOs. There's also much more processing power. So you're able to get a faster readout of the sensor, which improves things like rolling shutter. That means you can get a faster and better image in the viewfinder. And it also means you can get slightly more slow motion. So in 1080p, you can do up to 240 frames a second. The main thing that they've taken away with this is the image stabilization. You no longer get the 5-axis image stabilized sensor. You'd have to rely on any image stabilization that you'd have in the lens. In terms of lenses that we've got with us today, we've got a converted set of the Fujinon MK lenses, which are beautiful zooms. And we've got these Canon Cine Primes, which are of course lovely. I'm using a Metabones Speed Booster Ultra to get the most out of those lenses and widen the field of view a little bit. So using really, really fast glass really helps the image out of the camera, but means that they are manual cine lenses. You get no autofocus and you get no image stabilization. So without the stabilized sensor of the original GH5, we've now got no image stabilization here at all. Hence why all the shots I'm going to do today are on a tripod, which is fine, but if you want handheld, the stabilization on the GH5 might be the way to go, or pair it with a lens with image stabilization inside. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how the GH5s now fits into Panasonic's lineup. So this is the original GH5 and this is their brand new EVA cinema camera. And then obviously you've got the other Lumix cameras down here and the VariCam lineup higher than the EVA. And I reckon this fits bang in the middle. In terms of video, it's not necessarily a better camera than the GH5, it's a different camera than the GH5. It's got different strengths and different weaknesses. It doesn't have the stabilized sensor that the GH5 does. And the stabilized sensor is fantastic on the GH5. So that is a really sad omission. But this new camera does bring some quite large step ups in terms of image quality. In fact, I think in terms of image quality, this really does compete with the EVA rather than the GH5, particularly in terms of low light. I was absolutely amazed looking at the low light comparisons that at 6400 ISO, I think the GH5s is actually cleaner than the EVA 1 is, which is really surprising. It might be to do with the fact that EVA 1's dual native ISO is 800 and 2500, whereas in Vlog, the GH5s is 800 and 5000, like the VariCams are. It's probably because of that. If you turn this out of Vlog or hybrid log gamma into one of the normal record modes, the dual native ISOs are 400 and 2500. So that competes a little bit more. But in Vlog, it's 5000, and I think that really does let you get this amazing low light quality. There's also some other similarities, like this gives you time code in and out through the flash sync port, which is really clever. So there's no time code at all in the GH5. Time code in and out through the flash sync conversion cable here, and then a full BNC connection, time code connection there. So the GH5s definitely sits in the middle of the lineup. You'd still choose the GH5 for some work if you're doing anything handheld. The image stabilization in camera is going to be a huge benefit. And you'd absolutely still choose the EVA for anything where you're doing serious video production with more than one person or things like that. When you need those larger ergonomics, the better hand grip, the XLR inputs, the built-in NDs, all of these sorts of features, the EVA is going to be a fantastic choice and a much better one for you. But this really is a sweet spot in the middle. It's the ergonomics of the small camera, perfect for travel, weddings, things like that, and it's the image quality of the bigger one. So obviously when any low light camera is released, the obvious comparison that people are going to start to make is against the Sony A7S, which is pretty much top of the hill at the moment when it comes to low light performance. Now versus the GH5s, this is not a fair comparison at all due to the size of the sensor. This is a full frame sensor and that is a micro four thirds sensor. It's considerably larger sensor, which means that you get bigger pixels and it's easier to let in more light. So anyone would expect the A7S to completely beat the GH5s. What I was amazed by is that at ISO 6400, which is a very practical low light ISO that a lot of people use, they're actually very similar. In some cases, in some LUTs and stuff like that, in some shots, the A7S was better, in some the GH5s was better. But I mean, they are close. And then when you get up past 6400, the A7S is clearly better. There's absolutely no competition there. And what might be interesting is subjectively, the colors on the Panasonic GH5s might even be slightly better than on the A7S when it gets to these low light ISOs. So at 64,000 ISO, you could argue that the GH5s was doing a better job than this was, which is something I absolutely was not expecting to find before I did any tests. We can't really judge colours too much in this low light test, simply because I didn't have the right mesh bones to be able to put the same lenses on both cameras. So the A7S was using this 24-70 f2.8G master lens from Sony, and the GH5s was using a Metabone speed booster and full frame cine glass from Canon. So absolutely not a fair comparison on the lens side of things at all. So really, in terms of colours and skin tones and stuff, you have to take that into account. But I think it is pretty impressive how close these two cameras get. So I guess the question on everyone's minds will be, should you upgrade to this if you already own a GH5 or a different cinema camera or mirrorless camera? I mean, if image quality is the #1 thing for you and you want to keep that small form factor, I think this is a really good choice. I don't think people should be put off by the fact that this is a Micro Four Thirds sensor. It's performed way better than any Micro Four Thirds sensor I've ever used before, and to be honest, better than quite a lot of Super 35mm or full frame sensors that I've seen. It really is impressive what this camera manages to achieve in such a small form factor and low price point. If you want to know any more information about this camera, head over to proav.co.uk where you can purchase one or just see for more information on what accessories work well with it. Huge thanks to JJ Media for supplying this location for us. It's such an amazing place. It's a pleasure to shoot in. And of course, thanks to Serene for being our lovely actress. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.